Okay, welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries. I'm David Lizerbram, here with my co-host.
Andrew Keatts.
And I have a bit of a cold, so I sound like hell. There you go. Let's see. First of all, we are at Rock Docs Pod on Twitter. There still is a Twitter as we record. I don't think it's going anywhere, to be honest with you. Just breaking that. Although, who knows? We're also other places, Rock Docs Pod. And we talk about music documentaries. If you like it, throw us a review over on the old Apple Podcasts or whatever you care to do. And I don't know, let us know what you think. Anyway, today's episode is about Moonage Daydream, a documentary about David Bowie, directed by Brett Morgen, 2022.
Is our second 2022 release of 2022, if I have that right?
I think we've done a few. We did Aha. Was Billie Eilish, was that a 2022 release? Billie Eilish might have been. We haven't done a ton of new ones this year. There's Meet Me in the Bathroom, which we haven't gotten to see yet. Genius, that was this year, but we don't talk about that.
Do not re-listen to that episode and hear us say nice things about Kanye West.
Yeah, that was all before.
In fact,
that was all back when he was an excellent.
That's off of the feed. It's not even on the feed.
Yeah, it's you gotta send us a check if you want to hear that one. All right. Moonage Daydream, David Bowie. What do we? I don't have to ask you hey, had you previously heard David Bowie before you encountered this documentary? That's dumb.
What's your relationship with this 2-month-old movie? So what I would say about this movie is, I think this is the closest to an art picture that we have watched, or the least traditional documentary that we've watched, perhaps is another way of saying it. In some ways, maybe Velvet Underground would be in that category, but Velvet Underground is, I would say, considerably more traditional than this movie.
Yes. Velvet Underground is more narrative and linear.
Yeah.
Even though it is artsy, let's say. But this one is more of a tone poem or something, rather than there's a broadly, vaguely sequential narrative aspect to it. It sort of goes through his life in a way, but it's it's a lot of juxtaposition of different elements in different time periods and things like that.
It's sort of just like an immersive David Bowie experience. The images and the sounds and the ideas of David Bowie put at you for about 2 hours, and it does more or less go chronological through his life, and not even more or less. I think it goes chronological through his life. But the experience is more important, and some of the ideas that it comes across are sort of more experiential than they are explicit or spelled out through some sort of exposition. There's virtually no exposition.
For better or worse, this is not a documentary where you could have read the Wikipedia page and gotten the same gist, but it's just that with illustrated with some video and songs.
Yeah,
this is not that.
Yeah, a lot of the movies we talk about, and movies that we love, by the way, are basically, we joked about the Bob Dylan movie being especially a Wikipedia entry brought to life, but even some of the more even some of the more professionally produced and more artfully crafted films are, to some degree, a Wikipedia entry brought to life. You're learning about the musician. You don't learn much about Bowie, except in that you learn about him by seeing him play music, hearing his music, watching him be in the world. I listened to an interview with Brett Morgen, the director, who said that all of the other non-Bowie films that are used sort of as montage in this movie are things that he either has explicitly that Bowie had explicitly referenced as being important to him, or that he had used at some point. So nothing here comes out of nowhere. It's all very closely related to David Bowie.
Yeah, I want to talk about that part because I listened to that Mark Maron interview too on your recommendation, and that's a fair point, but you would not know that from just watching the movie. So the
No, no.
movie is a
Yeah,
lot of, especially at the early in the movie,
yeah,
it hits you with like tons and tons of this like you get this in a lot of documentaries where like you'll get a montage of just like random clips and it'll be like
yeah,
old grainy old movie clips and
yeah.
still photos and different things that kind of illustrate a time or a scene or a vibe, just kind of setting a tone. That's a very common documentary technique, and sometimes it's done well and sometimes it's not. This movie dials that up to like whatever, like to the max.
Mhm, mhm,
And it is just tons and tons of that. Like you're watching David Bowie, like a clip of David Bowie performing in 1973, and then you have narrative David Bowie talking in some other interview over that. But then it'll just boom, 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 hit you with like, you know, silent film footage for an eighth of a second, and then like a cartoon bit, and then something from a famous movie that you might have seen, and then some other thing, and like just that is happening so much in this movie. And you know, I mean, it, it takes a lot of work to do that, I guess. So that's cool. And I'm not saying it's all bad, but like most of the time when I was watching that, I'm like, what does this have to do with David Bowie? Like,
yeah,
I'm not getting any context here. It's like stuff about space and stuff about death and stuff about like whatever,
yeah.
uh, and sometimes things that I can't even tell you what literal point is being made. And if Brett is saying like, okay, like we can document somehow David Bowie making reference to every single one of these films and art projects and everything else, great. But you don't know that from watching
N
the movie. It's just a lot of stuff happening.
No, and I think that's where the idea of it being, like, an immersive experience of David Bowie comes in, where it's like, it's yeah, to your point, this isn't like, "Oh, David Bowie loved, new wave French cinema, and so here we're gonna show you some clips of it," and you walk
Right.
away going, "Oh, that was something that was an important reference point for David Bowie," right? Like, that's not what's happening. It's it's more like, uh, subconsciously, you are just being put in the middle of, like, a tidal wave of Bowie related ideas and sounds and images, even ones that you would never know are, but it's just a barrage. And so maybe this is a good way to say how this movie was released initially for a week as a IMAX exclusive. And I regret that I did not see it in IMAX. I think um, the the experience of seeing this movie might have been um, better in that setting than it was just on my TV at home streamed. I still enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong, but I think some of the stuff that we're kicking around here and that you described as like something you would never be aware of as, oh, David Bowie mentioned this later in his life, or it turned out he had this in his library or whatever. That stuff might feel more meaningful uh, and more interesting if in sort of uh, the experience of an IMAX theater or just any movie theater, frankly.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of like a movie theater, like seeing a movie in the theater is just a different thing. And the movie is
Hmm.
different in the, not just in a theater, but versus on a nice screen, versus on your phone, versus whatever. Like I don't necessarily know that any of those are bad, good, or whatever. It's just a different thing. Like I
Hmm.
recently saw The Fablemans, Steven Spielberg,
Yeah,
Spielberg.origins, The Fablemans. And, I loved it. I saw it in the movie theater. People are laughing at all the jokes and everybody was carried along by the emotion. I could totally see how if you watch that, like, it's kind of a long movie and you watch it like over 3 nights, you know, on your
yeah,
TV with your wife, like it might just kind of go down like content and you'd be like, all right, that was cool. The family story was interesting. There were some good bits, but like it might not hit the same way as like, you know, just being enveloped in the theater and the whole experience. Um, and this is the same thing. Like we can only review and discuss the movie that we saw, and what I saw was on my TV
yeah.
screen. And you know, bad on me that I didn't, make it out to the IMAX. I would have liked to, but I got
No,
a wife
yeah,
and
sure.
kid and a job and a podcast to do and stuff
The,
like that. So I can't
sure,
always
sure,
make
sure.
it
But
out.
the experience of watching the movie though was one where I was I found myself thinking, boy, this would have been a much more rich and interesting experience in a theater.
Yeah.
Because the visuals are important. It's a highly stylized piece of cinema. Everything that's happening is very intentional, very considered. You can see hours and hours and hours of labor in the movie, in the product, and I think it would have just been more interesting in that setting.
Yeah, totally. And the director Brett Morgen was really banging on about how this is how it should be experienced, which is fine. He made the movie for the experience that he wanted people to have, and there's no knock on that. I think we came out a little negative to start,
Yeah,
tone
in a
wise,
way so.
and we can get into that. But I just want to say,
Yeah,
I like when people are making a documentary and they take big swings.
yeah,
I want to encourage big swings, and this is a big swing documentary. Like there is
yeah,
no doubt this could have, like, Brett Morgen could have done a lot less work, and he could have gone down the normal
totally.
path,
Yeah,
and that would have been probably good too, like in its own way. Like we like regular, straightforward
yeah,
documentaries. Like he did not have to do as much as he did, and take it as far as he did, and take it as seriously as he did.
yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for that. I don't know that all of it works for me, but I don't. I also feel like this is also a movie where, like, I mean, I've watched it twice now, and both times are a little different in terms of the experience of watching it. And it might be the kind of thing where, like, 10 years from now, I have a different feeling about it. And I'm total.
Yeah,
So, like, I don't want although we were recording the official canonical Rock Doc episode about this
yeah,
movie,
yeah.
and this will go down as the most important opinion
Right.
about this movie ever to be
Yeah.
issued. I still want to have that flexibility and just say, well, again, we're talking about the movie we saw and the experience we saw it at this particular time. And this is definitely something that you might need to digest a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of times when people talk about rewatchability, I think they're talking about like the ease of the viewing experience. And in that context, this is not a rewatchable movie, but in a totally different sense, a movie that I think you could get something totally different out of just based on your mood on that day or the setting on a different day or what you'd been listening to or watching in the week or reading in the days or weeks ahead of each viewing. I think you could end up with a totally different experience on different sittings of this film. And yeah, I sort of have a sense that years from now I could watch this and have a totally different view of it. I want to be clear. I like this movie. I like this a lot, and I think to your point about it being a big swing. I think maybe one place we could start is just about Brett Morgen. He is very much a big swing director, and a big swing documentary director, primarily. And uh, I think so. So some of the movies that he has made that people may know, Montage of Heck about Kurt Cobain, June 17th, 1994. This was maybe the best of the 30 for 30 films. Certainly the most interesting in its conceit. It's about the single day in 1994 when O.J. Simpson's Bronco chase was going on in Southern California. At the same time, many other major events in sports history were happening simultaneously, and he just uses original footage from that day, jumping between them without any exposition. He made his name with a movie called The Kid Stays in the Picture. I have not seen that. Have you seen that movie?
That's the one I have seen, which is really good. And I like it a lot.
Yeah.
About
Um,
Robert Evans, the famous film producer who produced The Godfather, among many other movies, and is a famous Hollywood Lothario and raconteur. His book is great, and the film from it is great. And yeah, just if you like Hollywood history and the kind of seamier side of that, it's a blast.
yeah. And then Jane about Jane Goodall, and Crossfire Hurricane about Rolling Stones, just for a sampling. So I've seen all of those except for Kid Stays in the Picture, and he has a style. He has a clear um, uh, set of ideas that he's trying to put on film, and there are through lines through each of those movies. To compare it directly to Montage of Heck, it has a lot. This movie has a lot in common. Moonage Daydream has a lot in common with Montage of Heck. However, Montage of Heck does have some talking heads in it. It's a lot like this movie if you just decided after the fact to like plug in a smaller portion of talking heads than you would normally get in a rock doc, but you didn't want it to be quite so challenging. This movie, decides instead to go full bore and to commit to the idea and go all the way through with it. So I don't know. What do you think of the Brett Morgen of it?
Well, I mean, I'm just not familiar with most of his stuff. I just haven't seen a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. So I came
Mm-hmm.
into this a little bit more fresh. Kid
Mm-hmm.
Stays in the Picture, as I recall, I saw it a long time ago, and that's it's based on a book that is more sequential, and I think it's just it's a little bit more conventional.
Yeah.
It has montage assemblage of clips and juxtapositions and things like that, but as I recall, but it's more linear.
Yeah.
Um, so I was a little bit walking into this a little bit naive. Um, so yeah, this one, I mean, again, we're just kind of just jumping around here,
It's fine.
but that's fine because it's not really like we said a totally linear movie. It does, basically. I mean, just to kind of describe it, I guess, other than that
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff happening, and it kind of seems like if you wired something up to David Bowie's brain in 1977 when he was completely coked out of his mind and said, "Think of every movie you ever saw right now," and then you
Yeah.
could capture that on film. You would have that. This is what you would have. But it is a lot of concert footage, a lot from the Ziggy Stardust tour in the early '70s, and then going through the various tours in the '70s and to some extent '80s, '90s, etc. So you get a lot of the songs presented in live format. I mean, you get a lot of David Bowie's more well-known hit songs, but certainly not all of them. This is not an attempt to cram every hit into
Well, it's not an
in there.
attempt to. It's not an attempt to, but the movie. One very interesting thing about this movie is there might not be more than 5 minutes in the entire 2 hours plus runtime that does not have music playing. I mean, it's basically
It's wall-to-wall music.
wall to wall music, and so you know, David Bowie was a prolific artist. So yes, you don't get everything, but you do get David Bowie music beginning to end for over 2 hours. In that sense, it's like it. We're talking about it being like challenging and sort of like an art house picture in some ways. Um, but just by virtue of having David Bowie music the entire time, I suppose you could use it as like, you know, background to a small gathering or something, just because his music
Oh
would be
yeah.
on the whole time.
Yeah, and that's like I mean, the second time I watched it, I was homesick yesterday.
Hmm.
Thank you for your thoughts and prayers. I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of like threw it on when I was lying on the couch
Mhm.
recuperating, and my wife was in the home office working, and like we were talking about this movie, which she hasn't seen the movie, but she just kind of heard
Yeah.
it, and she was like, "Well, I didn't see the movie, but I enjoyed listening to a lot of great David Bowie music for a
Yeah.
couple
Yeah.
hours." Yes,
Exactly.
so that it does work on that level.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just kind of like, just to be clear, I mean, it does have a lot of it's wall to wall music, and I guess that's just David Bowie. He has so many big songs, but like,
Yeah.
you don't have Under Pressure, you don't have, I don't think Rebel shows up,
Yeah.
Young Americans,
Yeah.
the Golden Years, like a lot of big hit songs. Man Who Sold the World
Yeah.
like are not in there, and so they're not trying to cram them all in. There are songs that are less well known.
Yeah.
Um, that are given prominent place in lieu of some of those, but of course you get a lot of them. You get Heroes and a lot of others that are well known, so there's a mix of that.
I
The
so what I would
and
say though,
Go ahead.
what I would say though is it's less that it's less that some of his hits aren't in it, and more what separates it, I think, because I think it's probably true that a lot of rock docs, if you like took stock, don't actually put a check next to every like song on the greatest hits record.
Sure, sure,
I
sure.
think what's more missing here, and by missing I just mean it's not here, not that it should be here, is they do not ever stop and check in and talk about each song
No.
and tell you about its critical reception, or there's none of that.
Well,
The like the uh the straightforward description of his career and his choices, and that it only comes through if it happens to have been mentioned in one of the interviews with David Bowie where he's talking about his life and his career. And those are almost always, if he's talking about his career or his music in that way, it's almost always ancillary. Like that's not the reason that clip is in there to like catch you up on David Bowie's career. It's always because he mentions something about his career on the way to talking about his ideas about life on Earth.
Right, exactly. I mean, you don't get any of the stuff that a lot of rock docs get into, like how this song was written, what the inspiration for the song was, going in the studio, recording it. Like, other than a brief discussion of the Berlin period when he
Yes.
recorded those 3 songs with Brian Eno, there's nothing about the recording of the songs. And the interesting thing is that, like, this movie sounds so good
Mhm.
because uh, Tony Visconti, who produced tons of David Bowie's most well-known and beloved albums, like mixed the entire thing. Um and like spent a ton of time like really perfecting this sound. Because you get, live versions and recorded versions, and it's, from decades apart, and it all kind of is totally seamless and flows together so well. But Visconti, who is maybe David Bowie's the longest collaborator that he ever had in his entire life, is not mentioned or shown in the movie at all.
Yeah,
Like,
and that, like, to your point about the Berlin records, like they don't even say and then he went to Berlin and started working with his good friend and longtime collaborator Brian Eno. It's just like in passing, Bowie says like the thing I'm doing with Brian right now is, and like that's it.
yeah,
That's it.
right. They don't say
It's
he
a
recorded.
clause. Yeah.
Right. In any other documentary that
Yeah.
have said, and then he released the following 3 albums: Low, Heroes, and Lodger. And like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
like album covers would appear on there, and
Yeah.
you would see like the Billboard charts or their big hit or something.
And
Like,
then,
they don't mention any of that.
right. And then
It's just
David Byrne comes in. It's like that's when I was really sold on the whole thing or whatever. Like
right.
yeah,
Not
there's none of that.
yeah, it's like either expects you to just know all that stuff about David Bowie, like, maybe you or I do,
Yeah.
or it's just not relevant, and it's like you can just go and vibe with the whole thing, and you which is probably true. Like, maybe you just
Yeah.
don't. Maybe the reality is that either like I could tell you like every David Bowie album in order that it was released, probably, or pretty close,
Yeah.
because that's the kind of nerd I am, or it doesn't matter. Like, who cares? Like, the
Yeah.
stuff that a lot of other
That's
documentaries do, it does kind of call into question, like, do we need that information? Are you going to
I,
retain that? Like, there a quiz? Like, who cares?
if I were to guess, I think it's that. I think it's the latter point. I think that he's saying we don't need to be completist nerds about this. I've
Right,
given you plenty here. The
right,
the arc of the man's career is absolutely told in this movie.
right,
It's told that he goes to Berlin and that he's working on a particular like avant-garde style of music with a person named Brian, but he doesn't say it's Brian Eno. He used to work with the Talking Heads. Here's all
he was
these
in
other
Roxy
things.
Music. Yeah, right.
Right. It
It's
doesn't
not
say all that.
relevant.
But it does say that he then, and we sort of get that he then became one of the biggest rock stars on the planet, and and then so you get all the big beats in his life, but it's sort of more interesting because you spend more time in like what was going on in David Bowie's brain during those times than you
Right.
are like the rote description of his biography.
Right. They're also the other thing they don't do is they don't try to impress you with statistics. There's
Yeah,
nothing about like there's no thing saying like David Bowie had 27 top 10 hits
yeah,
or whatever,
yeah,
like a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
documentaries will do. He played to 17 million people in concert, or the biggest thing in Rio, or like there's none of that. Like,
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
it's you can Google that if you care. That's not what this movie is trying to
Yeah,
do. And it is. So I made a little bit of a joke about like, putting a wire up to David Bowie's brain, but it is kind of the intention here, for better or worse, is really to, um, get into his thoughts and feelings about things and experiences, and try to be as internal as possible.
yeah.
So it's not about the fans, although there's a little bit of the fans, but not very much. Nothing about his, collaborators, bandmates, none of that stuff. His
No.
first wife and his children are not mentioned. His second wife, Iman, of course, is mentioned, and that's like a famous couple. It's relevant to like basically him settling down and becoming a sort of elder statesman. So it's relevant to the artistic and philosophical journey he goes on. But other than that, it's not about his personal life. There's nothing about any controversies or scandals or him, the various dumb things he may have said over the time, over the years. It's just again, just trying to like put you in this vibe. Um, and I just don't know that I buy it in the sense that
Hmm.
when I think of David Bowie, I think of somebody who always came off, even when he like in his most coked up phases or whatever, as being very controlled and confident and like holding the stage in a certain way and um you know like he knew what he was trying to do at all times. And
Yeah.
even like in his most rockin' or most avant-garde songs, there's like a sort of stillness at the center,
Uh-huh.
like a calmness. I don't think of him as being frantic
Mm-mm.
or desperate or again, he had a very long life and a long career, so you could find elements of these things. But when I think of him, just generally speaking, I think of him just like being very cool, in that
Yeah.
sense. Not just like he's a cool dude, but like in that he's not revealing a ton of emotion. And the movie is so edited within an inch of its life
Yeah.
that is very different than again, this is Brett Morgen's view of David Bowie, and he's spent more time with this stuff than I have, so whatever. But just it clashed with my feeling
Hmm.
of this kind of zen-like stillness at the heart of David, this very questing person who was always looking for something different, but he always knew who he was at his core. Seeing all this stuff happening, I don't know. I was just suspicious of that approach. Like whenever I see tons and tons of editing and tons of montage, to me, that's it betrays a lack of confidence on the part of the filmmaker, which I'm not sure is always there. It's just my own bias. But I'm
Hmm.
always like, just hold on to one thing on the screen for a while. Like have confidence
Well,
in
so
what the shot
okay.
that you
So
chose. Okay. End of rant.
I'm intrigued by this for a couple reasons. One, so one of the explicit ideas that this movie explores that was something that David Bowie spoke about a lot, and we hear him go over at length here, is his belief that the world has been too afraid to embrace chaos, the chaos of life, and that he believes it's there, and that there's um, that we'd be happier if we were honest about it. Um, and so I don't think that contradicts what you're saying, but I think Morgan sees that sort of embrace of chaos as reflected by the visual style of the movie. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
That's made pretty explicit.
And then
No, no,
the
no. I
other
mean,
and so well, I agree with you that I think David Bowie has always come across as a very controlled person. He doesn't ever seem to be losing track of himself or his thoughts, either as a performer or just when he's speaking. He's he gave a lot of really thoughtful interviews over the course of his life, which were to the benefit of Brett Morgen's uh, visual style and the way he wanted to make this movie. He had a lot to choose from of David Bowie being very thoughtful on camera. Um, and so I agree with you, but he also talks a lot about schizophrenia and both like in like his actual life, his fear that it was something that because his brother was schizophrenic, that he thought maybe it was genetic and that it would come to him later in life. And sort of some people talk a lot about David Bowie's pursuit of different characters throughout his life, and I think there's a sort of schizophrenic quality to that. And I think his music is in some ways schizophrenic in like in a postmodern sense, and his career is schizophrenic in a postmodern sense. And I think this movie is trying to convey all of that. And I think this movie thinks of itself. Well, I know because Brett Morgen said he views this movie as like the proper style to echo the career and life of David Bowie in the way that as he says, like Rocket Man, the biopic was the same for Elton John. That he views this as like the equivalent of what Rocket Man was for Elton John, Moonage Daydream is for David Bowie. I gather that you don't think that parallel holds.
I think that's an interesting parallel. I could see that. Like that just seems like a slam on Elton John, which is fine.
Fair
Rocket
enough, but
Man
I think it
sucks,
seemed
but and Elton John is good, in
yeah,
my opinion. Those are my takes.
yeah.
I
Well,
mean, look.
he also mentioned the Bohemian Rhapsody, which I was amazed. He said he saw that movie like 14 times, and he which I gather he liked it. So
Yeah. Okay, that's a lot of information. Well, okay. I mean, I don't have any doubt that Brett Morgen made the movie he wanted to make here.
yeah.
Um, and I know that I applaud taking a big swing. And I just feel like maybe if there was 10% less of the choppy montage, flashy,
Yeah.
this, that, and the other, um, you could have accomplished the same thing, but like just dial it back a notch. And I mean, you have the music conveys that the concept of schizophrenia and chaos and all these things. First of all, like I feel like David Bowie was the person that could bring this message about embracing chaos, contradiction, juxtaposition. uh he famously would create lyrics by just like cutting things up randomly and assembling them, but it was never that random.
Mhm.
It wasn't like anybody could do that and it wouldn't be a David Bowie song or a David Bowie lyric. Like he was still the guy because he had this like inner stillness and coolness to bring that message, because that made it. If he was just like a crazy guy,
Mhm.
then the message wouldn't have been interesting. It would have just been like, whatever, you're just a crazy guy. Um, that contradiction is part of the deal. So you get that in his what he's saying. You get that in the different looks and vibes he goes through. You get that in the music, and then you also get that in the editing of the film. And it's like it's too many of those things. I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
For me, at this point, it felt a little bit like you were trying. He was trying. It was trying too hard to make the point. And when the movie started and it was like all this choppy stuff, I was like, "Is this like going to be 5 minutes and then we like can settle into a groove?" And to some extent, sometimes it does, but it
A
keeps
little
kind of
bit.
coming back to that. And it's like almost when they're not sure what to do, it goes back into that. Maybe I don't know. That's
Yeah.
it's hard to.
I think
I'm not
that's what
trying to
I think
read
that
into his mind here.
yeah, no, I think that would be a fair guess. I mean, I think the other thing is when they really settle in is I think when he has a a clip of Bowie talking and getting really deep on an idea that he wants to give time to.
Yeah,
I
and
think
that's the
that's
good
more,
stuff.
and I mean there is great stuff here of David Bowie just coming across as the incredibly smart, thoughtful person that everybody knew he is and and loved him to be, you know. Um and there's I mean we could get into some of that stuff, but yeah, I mean there's an awful lot of it that I there of stretches where I'm not getting much out of it, and it's challenging and not exactly in a way that I feel is like intellectually challenging as much as just difficult, you know?
Yeah, and it also kind of obscures the points that Bowie's making, because I mean, David Bowie was like in the history of rock music, maybe the
Yeah.
best talk show guest.
Yes.
Um, Maybe Tom
Yes.
Waits is up there. Like, there's a few others that were great. A Warren Zevon or whoever. But
Warren
like,
Zevon, yeah.
David Bowie, just in terms of like being an eloquent, like pretty genuine intellectual.
Mhm.
um, and I mean that like in a high, standard, not just like a guy who talks smart, but like, who's really spending a lot of time pondering and thinking about things and reading and trying to work through some serious stuff. Like but able to deliver things in a very digestible way that was also charming and interesting and never boring and whatever. I mean, his quotes are just unbelievable. He's like, the person who craves a lot of affection often isn't terribly good at giving it,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
and I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of great quotes in this movie.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but
But it's
I
not funny. There's like
well, it's
no
not
David
funny.
Bowie being funny, you know?
No, and I think that is a little bit lost too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm not sure that watching this movie, other than the thing about chaos and like, it starts with him like discussing time, and it really start at the very beginning. There was like a quote where he talks about Nietzsche and how like
Yeah.
man has to replace God, and there's a lot of like stuff that seems profound, but
Yeah.
at the end of it, watching this movie for 2.5 hours, like I don't know that I digested any of that, and maybe it like all went over my head, and I'm like
Yeah.
not smart enough to understand David Bowie or something. But like I don't know if that's necessarily it. I think it's kind of
Yeah.
just like it's thrown at you in this context of like so much else is happening that it's like,
Yeah.
listen, and I know the director spent years with, this, he didn't know Bowie, but like he spent years going through this stuff and digesting it and everything Bowie ever said and wrote and thought and whatever, and you want to get it all in there. Um, but just I feel like the movie doesn't give you enough breathing room to like you feel like you're being told these great pearls of wisdom, but I
Yeah.
couldn't even remember hardly any of them, because there's just so much
Yeah. That's
happening.
yeah, and I don't know what it all amounts to in the end. I think that's a fair criticism and probably one that I share. I mean, so for anybody who's unaware, because I don't know that we said this at the top, it's remarkable that everything we just said is true, and also that this is like a movie made with the sanctioned permission of the Bowie estate. He had full access to the archives, to everything. He was hired by the Bowie estate. They gave him final cut, so it's unlike some of these other movies that we've talked about that are sort of artist produced
Right.
depictions of the artist.
Right. The
Um,
brand is, protected at all costs.
yeah, but so to your point about the the Bowie's editor, or the partner being part of this, and that lending itself to its sound. Um, I mean, and just having full access to all of the rights here. I mean, it's wild that a movie like this is the product of the Bowie estate. I mean, I guess it isn't when you assume it's the Bowie estate as opposed to the estate of any other musician. If there was going to be one of those of that era of musician who was going to lend its name and archives to something like this, I think it would be him. But it is nonetheless wild compared to everything else we see on Netflix and everywhere else, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, but it's also like I know he had Final Cut and he could do whatever he want, but it's not a warts and all kind of documentary where he's trying to like
No,
grapple with
no,
things that David Bowie said that like could get you canceled today. Like
yeah,
that's not that. There's plenty of stuff that David Bowie said or did or is said to have done that doesn't stand up to 2022 scrutiny. That is not mentioned at all in this movie, and I don't necessarily know that's a flaw of the movie. That's not the point of the movie, but
yeah. I
it
think
is
Brett
not
Morgan's
like
just totally. I think he's just totally uninterested in that, and
yeah,
because likewise, there's like, every 2 to 6 weeks, an old Bowie clip goes viral, not to make him look bad about something that he said that has become outdated, but rather something that was ahead of its time, whether it's him waxing philosophical about the internet or grilling an MTV producer guy about the lack of black artists on MTV in the mid 80s. And like, yeah, so Brett Morgan's uninterested in like anything he might have said that is ugly in retrospect. He's also completely uninterested in anything that Bowie said that was ahead of its time either. Like
yeah,
that's just not his. That's sort of like very online 2022 way we talk about musicians or celebrities is like not the interest of this movie.
right, right. So, um, yeah, I mean, so we talked about the sound of it, and we talked about the editing style, which
Mm-hmm.
we have opinions about, but kind of separate and apart from that, the visual style of this movie is stunning.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so one thing that we do kind of complain about sometimes in documentaries is that it can just kind of be a hodgepodge because you're getting footage. You're getting still photos and you're getting footage of the artists performing live and whatever else, and it's all from different eras and different film stocks and video and things like that. And um, putting that together into something that seems like that fluently goes together is a real skill and talent. And sometimes it just kind of looks like, okay, we got this film strip from this band's performance in 1965 that is relevant to what we're talking about here. Throw that in there, and it just kind of is
Mm-hmm.
just like there's no aesthetic carrying through. This is the
Yeah.
opposite of that, and I would
Yes.
encourage people to go look at Brett Morgen's Twitter feed, because he has like been highlighting individual frames from the movie and showing what the original footage looked like, and then what it looks like in the movie. And they did so much work to change the coloring, the lighting, the focus, like all different types of things, um, to in order to like have the colors of the movie go through like seamlessly, and to have it all be kind of one aesthetic. I mean, you can obviously see like, okay, this is a TV, interview show with Dick Cavett, and it was shot on video versus, 35 millimeter footage from a feature film that he made versus 16 millimeter footage from a concert or whatever. You can see that it's different, but it is the the overwhelming visual aesthetic is so strong, carries through so strongly, and the color choices, and it's just like 99% of documentaries we watch, that's not even
No.
they don't even seem to be trying to do that, let
No.
alone have the skill and the time and the money and the everything else and to do it. And that is awesome. I mean, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that they,
I mean, I'm trying to think
mess
of
with the footage to make it all
any.
kind of come through.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to think about the movies we've seen that you could say had any sort of coherent single visual style throughout,
I
let's
mean,
say
Velvet Underground
Velvet
does.
Underground, Get Back.
Yeah, I mean, Get Back, but that's all.
That's
The
all
footage is
one.
all,
For sure. It's a little bit different.
yeah, I mean, to some extent, I would say Rolling Thunder Review, but again, that's all that stuff is all filmed at the same time.
Right.
So
Right.
it's
Right.
not, you don't have to deal with this kind of hodgepodge. To some extent, I mean, like, look, the Sparks movie has a strong visual style that carries through in the
Yeah.
contemporary interviews and things,
Yeah.
and that's great. But again, he wasn't trying to take it as far as this movie does. I've been watching a lot of going back and rewatching a lot of Wong Kar-wai movies,
Hmm.
um, Hong Kong movies from like the 90s, and I kind of feel like the aesthetic of this and the color choices remind me of that a little bit. And maybe it's just because there's like a recency bias because that's what I've been watching. But it's like you can compare this to very sophisticated s- uh, fiction film cinematography,
Hmm.
um, from the people that do that absolutely the best. And it lives in that world, and that is
Yeah.
I mean, it's just really great to see. I just wish other documentarians would try or would have the resources or skills or whatever to try to do that, because it makes such a difference in terms of the experience of watching it.
Yeah. Yeah. The shot that sticks with me the most is Bowie on the escalators. It looks like in like a
Mm.
mall or something like that. It's like fluorescent lights that are along the rims of the escalators. And yeah, like nothing's happening during that clip,
Mhm.
and it's like mesmerizing, and it had me sitting there thinking about it for well afterwards. It sort of is a defining segment of the movie to me.
Yeah. I mean, I guess part of what I'm saying is like, Morgan had the benefit of working with stuff that Bowie had either shot
Yes.
or people around him. And like, I mean, he was one of the, if not the most talented visual artists that was also a rock star,
Right.
So like you
Right.
have that benefit, it's not just like random footage that, was shot by whoever. But there's a lot of clips in the movie. Another thing that I did really enjoy about the movie was it spends a lot of time showing films that David Bowie had made. And again, this is all just none of it's contextualized really. The
Yeah.
only thing that's contextualized is at one point he talks about his paintings and how he was doing a series of paintings of people in Berlin who were either Turks, who were migrants to Germany, or people who had migrated from East Berlin to West Berlin. And this is when the wall was still up, so they were like kind of displaced people or refugees or whatever you call it. And then the movie just goes through like one after the other, like a
Yeah.
lot, like maybe 50
Yeah.
paintings, all in very different styles. A lot of kind of like abstract expressionist, or to some extent early 2000s modernist stuff like Egon Schiele, like that kind of style. But so you can see the references. And again, I don't pretend to know like every artist that David Bowie was familiar with, by a long shot. Um, he's referencing like Caspar David Friedrich, the Romantics, and stuff like that. But I mean, that's really impressive, and it is put in context because that's just one segment. All the video clips are just kind of interspersed through the film, and you don't know what is a home video
Yeah,
experiment that David Bowie had made versus a clip from maybe a a video, like a song video that he
a
had,
music video. Yeah,
that you maybe just never saw, or you saw once in on 120 minutes in 1991 and never ran again. So but
yeah.
still,
I don't.
even though he
I
worked
don't
with other
think any.
directors.
I don't think any context at all is provided about where all
No,
that footage comes from. I don't think there's
no.
any even like snippet if you're listening carefully or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to know more, but it is cool to see. I mean, you just get a very strong sense
Oh
of his
yeah.
visual style. Um, so, that I love. I mean, again, there's a lot to really like in this movie. So, I don't wanna just come off bashing it because there's things I struggle with.
Yeah, I mean it's a different movie than the kind we typically talk about, and so I'm interested, in some of your thoughts on what Brett Morgen had to say about the more traditional rock docs. He clearly doesn't hold them in especially high regard. However, he says that he basically went to the Bowie estate and said basically there's there's two different ways to do this movie. One is the movie he made that we've been talking about for the last 46 minutes. And the other is like uh, a, a Brett Morgen but a straightforward version, but made by Brett Morgen. And he says like that the version of that would be like the Bee Gees movie, which he loved. So he doesn't dislike all of them, but he sort of he just seems, well, it doesn't seem, he's straightforwardly says that he's uninterested in that sort of A to Z. We're learning about the history of this band. I'm going to walk you through everything approach, and sort of thinks that it's sort of turning your brain off to watch those sorts of rock docs. So, uh, short of responding to that shot across our bow, what do you think about that sort of idea of like um, what he's doing versus what most of the medium otherwise does?
I would encourage people to listen to that interview,
Mhm.
with Brett Morgen and Mark Maron. I think I'm a big fan of Mark Maron, as you know. I think Maron
Mhm.
doesn't come off very well in that one because he is just kissing ass for an hour and a half. Like he is like, dude, back off a little bit. I don't know. He just is real sprung for the guy, and it gets to be a little, it's like Jimmy Fallon almost. Like enough already. But Brett Morgan comes off well,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, he doesn't, you know, yeah, he doesn't like really bash as a genre, like all like I mean, he talks about how like he just throws on like the generic Netflix, music documentary and enjoys it. Like he's not out,
Yeah.
trashing, which is fine. I mean, he's working in the industry and he doesn't want to like trash everybody. And I don't think he's like stifling his real opinion, maybe, but I didn't get that feeling. Um,
And I don't want to come
it's
across as like defensive because those are the types of movies that we
no,
normally talk about. I think most of what he says is basically true. I mean, we have a more positive disposition towards saying something very similar when we like, say like, is Boogie Nights a rock doc, right? Like that the
right, right,
whole
right.
idea of our recurring bit about rock docs being the sort of like light fare that are easy to throw on, even if we do discuss them seriously and hold them in high regard and think they're more than that ultimately, is at least acknowledging that they are sometimes quite easy viewing. And this movie is not that. This movie aspires to something more than that, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not really sure. I think probably if like we sat down with Brett Morgan and hey, you're invited to come on, Brett.
Yeah.
Feel free to join us. And I think that probably our opinions about a lot of movies would overlap a lot.
Hmm.
So I don't think we're like totally in a different
Yeah.
dimension. Um, it is hard to. I mean, I hold David Bowie in such high regard that to the extent that this film could be seen as Morgan himself putting himself alongside David Bowie. Like, well, I'm doing the same
Yeah.
thing Bowie did. Bowie didn't just sit down and write a love song,
Yeah.
to make a buck or
Yeah.
because, it was an assignment or whatever. Like, he was always pushing the boundaries and he was always doing something different and, juxtaposing different things and trying and failing and, taking big swings. Like, it's clearly he's aspiring to be in the same realm.
Mhm.
And that's great that he's
Yeah.
aspiring to do that. And I mean, if he fails, that's because nobody gets there. Like even David Bowie didn't usually get there a lot of times. So,
Yeah.
that's but you're holding yourself to the highest possible standard. So, even getting close to that is great. Um so I mean, again, I just don't know that
I mean, he said
it's
he
just
does
not
say
his
in that
thing.
interview
He's
that
not he doesn't see himself spending
yeah,
his time making that kind of movie. It's just not his he doesn't
right.
really diss it.
Yeah.
It's just not a
No.
more conventional, straightforward, mainstream, streamlined narrative film project is just not what he does. He's
Yeah.
had the good fortune in his career to kind of get the blank checks in a
Yeah.
way, to do what he wants to do. And I'm sure he finds himself fortunate
Yeah.
to do that. And so, he
Yeah.
doesn't have
He
to crank out a documentary about ZZ Top to, pay the mortgage or whatever. It seems like he's got a good thing going. And
Yeah.
so he doesn't really have to think about that, you know?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't know. That's my
he's
interpretation of
lighthearted
it.
about it. He says the like Crossfire Hurricane that he does, you know, they unbeknownst to him had a Crossfire Hurricane reunion tour planned, pegged
Right.
to the release of the documentary. And so, you know, he didn't realize it, but he was essentially making a piece of, a promotional piece
Right. He was like
for their tour.
Shanghaied into making a promotional documentary, I guess. I haven't
Yeah.
seen that one, so I don't
And
know.
he has a sense of humor about it. He doesn't seem too burned by that. But I think it's fair to say that he doesn't consider that like his finest work. you know,
Yeah.
um, I think we should at some point though watch Montage of Heck because that's an interesting movie too, and I think um, I guess I would say that in this little world we're in, talking about all these movies, Brett Morgen's an interesting guy doing a specific thing, and given that there's at least 3 instances of him making movies that would fall within our purview here, I think Montage of Heck would be a good one for us at some point.
Yeah, I just never happened to catch it. But
It's on HBO
look,
Max. It's good. It's good. It's interesting.
look, I'll tell you, if I hear next year Brett Morgen is working on a documentary about any musical subject you can think
Yeah,
of, I'm interested.
yeah,
Like I'm ready. Like
yeah.
I'm not bored, and I know it's going to be something different than what we see all the time, and uh, I respect that again. Even if not every swing connected in this one all the time, I it's I mean it's a real piece of work.
So something Marin said in that interview, and something our friend Nick of Nick's Picks fame seemed to
The people's
at least
champ.
partially agree with. Yes, is that Marin specifically says that he came away thinking less of Bowie after this movie,
I didn't get that at
and
all.
I am mystified by that. I
I don't.
really I don't see where that comes from in this. I don't I don't know that I come away like revering him more than I did before or anything like that, or like, I was right to think of him as one of the people who really got it. Um, you know, but I certainly don't understand why one would come away with a lesser view of the man.
I can't account for that either.
Yeah,
Because to me, he comes off
it comes off
as a
like
guy who
David
made.
Bowie to me.
Yeah, he's David Bowie. He made great music. He looked
Yeah,
cool every moment of his life,
yeah,
and he did a lot of cool visual stuff and was interesting and thoughtful. And
yeah.
I don't know how. I don't know what your stance toward David Bowie would have to be going into the movie to have a lesser opinion of him.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I guess like he talks in the beginning about like I mean I guess the movie gets into to some extent the fact that in the 80s he became this huge pop star
Yeah,
and was playing like the biggest stadiums, and he kind of did that deliberately. Like he was like, okay, now I'm going to be bigger than ever after he did a lot of
yeah,
experimental work. and he succeeded at that. And then he's like doing Pepsi commercials with Tina Turner, and whatever. And you kind of see him doing this kind of cheesy stuff, and he talks about basically like, well, I don't think poverty is equal to inspiration or something like that. But really, like, the point being that like he kind of lost his way a little bit, and then the movie really doesn't get very much into the work he did in the 90s, the 2000s, even though I think there's a lot of really good
Is
stuff
that
there.
one? Is that one
Sorry.
long? There's a long performance of um, is it Hello Space Boy? I
In
guess
the
that,
beginning, yeah. Yeah.
or towards the end. Is
Oh,
that
right, right, right.
is that with the piece with Nine Inch
Pet Shop
Nails?
Boys. No, the Nine Inch Nails song was "I'm Afraid of Americans."
Okay, yeah,
And you don't see that in the movie. You don't see anything that he did with Nine Inch Nails. I saw David Bowie on that tour at the
yeah,
Forum, and it was awesome.
nice.
Um, and and I, yeah, I mean, the movie really glosses. It. You're 2 hours into a 2 hour and 15-minute movie, and like it's 1985, and the guy lived for another 25 years or 20 years
Yeah,
after that, and did a lot of work, put out a lot of albums, did a lot of stuff. That's just really glossed over, and I think that's very common in the movies we discuss, and
mm.
it always bugs me because like the later stuff's always, I
Except for
how much.
Bogdanovich with Petty, baby. That's-
Well, also Sparks. I mean, that the every
yeah,
single thing
that's
they
true.
did was
Sparks,
treated as seriously. But yeah, it's like I love Ziggy Stardust, but I don't need more of that. Like, I know what that looks like and sounds like, and I would love to get a fresh take on stuff that he did in the 90s, 2000s,
yeah,
and again, that's not the movie he was trying to make. Fine, but I would love to see that movie. The Joker Man take on David Bowie.
yes.
I'd love to see that. That's a movie I'd love to see. It's just not this movie. Um, so if I have a complaint, it's like, you had 2 hours and 15 minutes and you really covered the first half of his career. But again, they all do that. So whatever. Did you have a question that I lost the plot on?
No, I think you got there. I don't even remember what I asked. It's fine.
Okay. Listener, write in and
Well,
tell us.
I like that the performance of Hello Space Boy, I think is really cool.
Yeah,
It's just he looks like he could be like the singer of like Buck Cherry, 19 like
oh
that
yeah,
clip from like it's like so 1995.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, he had some looks.
Yeah.
So all right. Anything else we need to address with this one?
It's a weighty one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not an easy one. You got to really chew on this one. Um,
Yeah.
I guess I'm gonna ask if somebody's just looking for something to watch. Do you tell them to throw this one on? If they're not like already a David Bowie head, if so, they've already seen it probably.
You know what? I guess I probably wouldn't. You know what? Who I would recommend this to, regardless of what their take on David Bowie is? Just somebody who's like a film nerd.
Hmm. Okay.
I think there's more to this as like a movie than there is as a rock doc,
Okay.
or a Bowie movie. I think
Yeah.
I think that's where I would land on the recommendation scale.
So yeah, I've been kind of waiting to respond to something you said at the very beginning, which is like this one doesn't like. It's just a little tough, maybe a tough hang, or you just can't throw it on. It doesn't
Yeah.
have that thrown on. I kind of like had a different vibe. Like, the first time I watched it, I was like really watching it seriously and taking notes because
Yeah.
we are gonna do a this, and then like I said yesterday, I just kind of threw it on. I was on the couch. I was like kind of falling asleep because I was sick, and then I would get up and like whatever, make myself some tea or something, and uh, I kind of like the movie a little bit better with a little bit of a less
Yeah.
intense focus. Like maybe there's so much going on that you can just kind of dip in and out, and
Yeah.
if you watch it intensely for 2 hours and 15 minutes and try to absorb everything and really get the point, maybe it doesn't all cohere. But if it's just kind of on,
Yeah.
and like the music sounds great, and you kind of walk out of the room, but you can still hear it, and you come back in and you see like David Bowie doing a cool dance and looking cool, like, and then you go back to what you're doing, like that's cool.
Yeah.
So
So maybe it
I
is.
think it
like,
secretly
maybe it's
is
like
more
the
of a
ultimate. Yeah, maybe it's the ultimate rock doc. Like
yes.
this is the most throw it on movie we've ever discussed.
Yes,
Like,
the more attention you pay, the less you're gonna get. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
Yeah.
But it. Yeah. So, I think despite my negative approach to the editing and some of the choices that are made, I do. I mean, I just found it I do find it entertaining. So from
Yeah.
that level and the level that like, hey, you like David Bowie's music, you want to have that on, maybe throw it on when you're, not necessarily gonna, be watching every minute, but just have it on, and it'll be cool.
Yeah.
And you'll, at worst case, you'll hear some cool music and
It
see some cool
definitely
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it does look absolutely beautiful, and it sounds incredible. So, from that perspective, yeah, this is as easy a watch as it's gonna get.
Yeah,
You might not
catch
be
a
able to
virus, lie down on your couch, be kind
yeah,
of out of it.
you might not be able to
Cold
write
medicine,
a
whatever.
coherent theme at the end, but,
Yeah, it worked a lot better in that mindset. So it's a set
okay.
and setting kind of situation, I think,
Alright.
for this one. You need a spirit guide. You need I don't know. Anyway, there you go. Again, we are at Rock Talks Pod. If you want to yell at us and tell us our opinions about this movie, we're all wrong or all right. And you can leave us a review, all that stuff. And yeah, we'll be back next time with more Rock Talks.
Maybe a temporary reassurance that indeed there is no beginning, no end.